In this episode, we take on a topic that often feels intimidating to beginners because it comes with big names and a lot of organizational language. But the core idea is actually simple. Governance frameworks are maps, not handcuffs. When people hear frameworks like Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies, COBIT, and Information Technology Infrastructure Library, ITIL, they sometimes imagine a strict rulebook that must be followed word for word. In reality, frameworks are structured ways to think about how an organization should set goals, manage risk, deliver services, and prove that security is being handled responsibly. SecurityX cares about this because security is not only a technical problem. It is a management problem where you need repeatable decisions, clear accountability, and evidence that controls are working. Frameworks help with those outcomes by providing common language and common categories, which is useful when different teams need to coordinate. We are going to explain what COBIT and ITIL are trying to accomplish, how they relate to security work without becoming tool-specific, and how control mapping works in a practical way that makes exam questions easier. The goal is to help you recognize framework thinking and apply it wisely, not to memorize a giant dictionary of terms. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Governance itself is worth defining clearly because beginners sometimes confuse it with management or with compliance. Governance is the process of setting direction, making decisions about priorities, and ensuring accountability for outcomes. Management is the day-to-day work of executing that direction. Compliance is demonstrating that you met certain requirements, either internal rules or external obligations. Governance frameworks focus on the first part, direction and accountability, because that is where many security programs fail quietly. If leadership does not set clear priorities and does not assign accountability, security becomes reactive and inconsistent. A framework gives you a structured way to answer questions like, what are we trying to protect? How do we measure success? Who owns each responsibility? And how do we know our controls are working? On an exam, governance often appears when the scenario involves aligning security to business goals, defining roles, making risk-based decisions, or ensuring oversight. When you see those clues, framework thinking is likely the right lens. The exam does not usually want you to chant framework names. It wants you to think in a framework-shaped way, consistent, measurable, and accountable. COBIT is best understood as a governance and management framework focused on ensuring information and technology are used effectively to achieve organizational goals. The easiest way to think about it is that it connects business objectives to technology activities through governance processes and management practices. It is not a security-only framework, but security fits inside it because security is part of controlling risk and enabling trustworthy outcomes. In a COBIT mindset, you care about value delivery, risk optimization, and resource optimization, and you want to measure performance so you can improve. That may sound abstract, but it becomes practical when you consider what leaders need. Leaders need to know whether technology is helping or hurting the organization, whether risks are being managed, and whether the organization can prove control and oversight. COBIT helps by organizing responsibilities and by emphasizing that governance should evaluate, direct, and monitor, while management should plan, build, run, and monitor. If you remember that split, you can handle many exam questions that ask whether something belongs at the governance level or at the operational level. ITIL, on the other hand, is commonly used to guide service management, meaning how technology services are designed, delivered, supported, and improved. If COBIT helps answer, are we governing technology to meet business goals? ITIL helps answer, are we running technology services in a consistent, reliable way? Security connects to ITIL because secure services are part of reliable services. A system that is constantly being compromised, misconfigured, or interrupted is not a good service. The ITIL mindset emphasizes that services should be managed through processes that are repeatable and continuously improved. When you hear terms like incident management, problem management, change enablement, and service continuity, You are in ITIL territory. You do not need to memorize every label to understand the value. ITIL helps an organization reduce chaos by defining how work flows, how issues are handled, and how changes are controlled. On SecurityX, if a scenario is about managing incidents, controlling changes, or improving service reliability, a service management framework mindset often points you toward process discipline and clear workflow rather than ad hoc fixes. Now let's connect these two frameworks in a way that helps you reason on the exam. COBIT is often used at a higher level to shape governance structures, define accountability, and ensure oversight, while ITIL is often used to shape operational practices for delivering and supporting services. That does not mean they never overlap, but it means their emphasis differs. If leadership is asking, are we managing risk appropriately and can we prove control, COBIT is a good lens. If operations is asking, how do we handle incidents consistently and keep services stable, ITIL is a good lens. In many organizations, both can be used together, where governance sets expectations and operations uses service management practices to execute. For the exam, the most important skill is to recognize which kind of problem you are solving, a direction and accountability problem, or an execution and workflow problem. If you can label the problem correctly, you can choose answers that match the right layer. This is similar to choosing between policy and procedure, but at the program level rather than the document level. Control mapping is where frameworks become practical, because mapping is the act of connecting a security control to a requirement, an objective, or a risk. Beginners sometimes imagine mapping as paperwork, but mapping is really a translation exercise. Different groups speak different languages. Auditors might speak in terms of requirements. Executives might speak in terms of risk and business impact. Engineers might speak in terms of controls and configurations. Mapping lets you show how the control work supports the requirement and reduces the risk. For example, if the organization has an objective to protect customer data, and there is a requirement to restrict access to authorized users, you can map that to access control practices, review processes, and monitoring. The advantage is that you avoid reinventing controls for every new request, because you can reuse existing controls and show how they satisfy multiple needs. On the exam, mapping shows up when you are asked how to demonstrate compliance, how to align controls to frameworks, or how to ensure coverage without gaps. A strong answer often involves mapping because it creates traceability, meaning you can trace from requirement to control to evidence. A practical way to think about control mapping is to start with the why, then move to the what, then the how, then the proof. The why is the business objective or the risk concern, like preventing financial fraud or protecting sensitive data. The what is the requirement or expected outcome, like limiting access or retaining logs. The how is the control, like access reviews, least privilege, or monitoring. The proof is evidence, like review records, audit logs, or reports. A beginner does not need to build an elaborate database to understand this chain. The chain matters because many exam questions are really asking which link is missing. If there is confusion about expectations, the missing link might be the what, meaning a standard or a requirement definition. If controls exist, but nobody can prove they are working, the missing link might be proof, meaning evidence collection and reporting. If leadership is unhappy with security outcomes, the missing link might be the why, meaning objectives and risk alignment. This chain helps you interpret scenarios without memorizing framework pages, because you can reason through what the organization needs to connect. Another important idea is that mapping should be practical, not performative. Beginners sometimes think the best security program is the one that claims to follow every framework perfectly, but that is not realistic or useful. A wise approach is to choose frameworks as reference points and then adapt them to the organization's size, risk, and complexity. A small organization might not need the same depth of governance as a global enterprise, but it still needs clarity, accountability, and evidence. Overbuilding governance can create a program that is technically correct but operationally ignored, because people spend more time feeding the process than doing the work. Underbuilding governance creates a program that depends on individual heroics and fails when people leave or when systems scale. The exam often rewards balanced thinking, where you apply frameworks to improve consistency and oversight without pretending every organization needs the same heavy structure. If an answer option feels like it adds huge overhead without addressing the specific problem, it might be a distractor that is framework-shaped but not outcome-focused. It also helps to understand that frameworks are not competitors in a cage match. They are tools for different jobs. Sometimes you use a governance framework to design the oversight structure, and you use a service management framework to run the day-to-day processes, and you use security control frameworks to define what controls should exist. Even if SecurityX only names a couple of frameworks in a title, the real skill is to understand that frameworks help you avoid gaps and duplication. Mapping is the glue that lets multiple frameworks coexist, because you can show that one control supports multiple objectives across different models. For example, a change management process can support service reliability goals, security hardening goals, and compliance requirements. If you map it well, you can avoid building separate processes for each audience. The exam may present scenarios where different stakeholders are asking for different proof, and mapping is a way to respond efficiently. Instead of creating new controls each time, you show how existing controls align and where small additions can close gaps. A common misconception is that control mapping means taking a list of controls and checking boxes until you run out of patience. Real mapping starts with risk and objectives, because otherwise you can end up with a checklist that does not reduce the risks that actually matter. That is why governance matters first. Governance sets priorities, so mapping is guided by what the organization cares about. Another misconception is that frameworks are only for audits. Audits benefit from frameworks, but day-to-day security benefits too, because mapping helps you plan work. If you know which controls support which objectives, you can prioritize improvements that deliver the most risk reduction. You can also identify overcontrol, where multiple overlapping controls exist for one low-risk area, while another high-risk area has weak coverage. Mapping makes those imbalances visible. On SecurityX, visibility and prioritization are recurring themes, and frameworks are a way to structure that visibility. Let's ground this in a simple mental picture that you can use during exam questions without needing technical detail. Picture a top layer of goals and oversight, which is governance. Picture a middle layer of processes that keeps services stable, which is service management. Picture a layer of controls that reduce risk, like access control, monitoring, and incident response. Now imagine drawing lines from goals to processes to controls to evidence. That is control mapping in a practical sense. When a scenario describes confusion, lack of accountability, inconsistent behavior across teams, or inability to demonstrate compliance, the solution often involves strengthening those lines. Sometimes the fix is clarifying a goal and assigning accountability, which is governance. Sometimes the fix is improving a process like change handling or incident response, which is service management. Sometimes the fix is implementing or tightening a control, which is the security layer. And often the fix includes improving evidence and reporting so leadership and auditors can see the program working. This layered picture helps you avoid answers that jump to controls when the real problem is governance, or answers that jump to governance when the real problem is execution. As we wrap up, the takeaway is that frameworks like COBIT and ITIL are valuable because they help you run security with structure, clarity, and proof, not because they are fashionable names. COBIT helps you think about governance, accountability, and aligning technology with organizational goals, while ITIL helps you manage services with consistent processes and continuous improvement. Control mapping is the practical skill that connects objectives to requirements, to controls, and to evidence, so you can demonstrate coverage and make better decisions. For SecurityX, you do not win by memorizing long lists. You win by recognizing the type of problem in a scenario and choosing the framework-shaped response that fits the situation. If you can keep the goal in view, use mapping to create traceability, and apply frameworks proportionally instead of blindly, you will answer questions with confidence, and you will also build a mindset that scales beyond the exam. Governance done wisely makes security steadier, simpler to explain, and easier to improve, and that is exactly what a strong program is supposed to be.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.